Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. What if Naruto neglected and became Thunder Dragon? Movie. So it had come, the final battle of good and evil. The final, deciding factor in the war over the fate of the elemental nations was underway. The force for good was Namikaze Naruto, the last remaining hope against the leader of Akatsuki. The force of evil, squaring off against Naruto, was a man who was known simply as Obito. One side seeking peace through unity and solidarity within the countries, the other seeking peace through enslavement and illusion, yet both were steadfast in their belief that their way was right. They stared at one another from across a desolate and destroyed wasteland. Naruto stood enshrouded in a bright chakra cloak reminiscent of his sage cloak, with a large seal array that spanned his whole body. Obito stood opposite him, his long cloak tattered, his mask cracked, and his battle fan missing chunks out of it. His mismatched eyes stared intently at Naruto, watching him calculatingly. The tension in the air was thick. Any sudden movement would shatter it, and cause another bout of blows to be traded. It was Obito that broke the palpable silence. I can see your chakra levels are fading quickly, you're almost down to your last dregs. Soon, the Kyuubi will be mine, and with the complete Jubi, my plan will be ready, and the hope of this world will be gone. Then I'll just have to end you here and now. Naruto shouted as he raised his hands to his sides. He concentrated before shooting off fast enough to only be seen as an orange flash. He appeared to the left of the Uchiha, throwing his right hand across in an arcing hammer fist, which passed right through the Uchiha as he countered with a slash of the big fan. It passed harmlessly through an afterimage as Naruto's left hand appeared through his face as Naruto phased through his opponent. Madara reacted by solidifying as Naruto passed through, only to catch a tail-like tendril of chakra to the face as he went to grab Naruto. Having been sent careening to his left, the Uchiha righted himself before launching a wall of fire at the blonde. Naruto retaliated by zipping around the attack in another flash of orange before launching a roundhouse at the Uchiha. His foot passed through where his opponent's back was, before continuing his spin with a spin kick that passed through Obito once more. As his kick completed its circuit, his chakra cloak flickered before disappearing completely. Seizing the opportunity, Obito grabbed a hold of Naruto's left wrist, before wrenching it behind the blonde's back. Naruto snarled as he jabbed his fingernails into his opponent's chest in an attempt to get him to release his wrist. All it managed to do was draw blood as the Uchiha ignored it. Looks like you've reached your end. I admit, it was a good effort. But now, I have won and you have lost, and all hope for this world has vanished, Obito smirked triumphantly behind his mask. Naruto continued to struggle to break the grip that the leader of Akatsuki had on his arm, before he felt warm trickle of blood down his fingers. His eyes widened in wonder before his trademark grin settled into place. I've got one more trick up my sleeve, bastard. In an instant he gathered up the remaining dregs of Kurama's chakra before channeling it into his hand and directly into his opponent's body. The highly corrosive and destructive chakra started to flow into Obito's chakra coils. Obito's eyes widened before trying to throw Naruto away, only to be surprised when his fingers sank deeper into his skin, and grabbed hold of a hand-sized chunk of flesh, with his middle finger hooked behind a rib. A startled gasp of pain escaped Madara before the burning started. He tried to phase out, but was unable to due to the demonic chakra coursing its way through his system. He tried again, before calling out in pain again, only this time, it was a roar of pain. Let go, brat, the Uchiha spat out in fury, before grabbing his wrist again and twisted it, gaining a sickening crack and sharp cry of pain as he broke Naruto's wrist, yet the resilient blonde refused to let go, despite the raging fire in his wrist. You die here, asshole. Naruto gritted out in pain. It took all of his amazing willpower to keep his hold on the Uchiha. Face it. You've lost. In response to his declaration, despite the pain in his body, he started his teleportation warping jutsu. His mind delirious with pain, he didn't think for a second that this could be the worst possible decision he had ever made. As the time-space warp flowed around him and Naruto, their bodies started to disappear and after a few seconds, they both disappeared, leaving the battleground vacant of all life. In another realm a mighty beast was dying. This was an ancient being, living well past the normal age those of his kind reached. He was a colossal reptilian-like beast. He was covered snout to tail in glorious golden scales. Jewelry hung from the ends of several of his facial horns. The air about him was smothered and clouded with his ancient presence. He was in his lair, filled with various piles and mounds of precious stones, gold, magical artifacts, and weapons. His head was resting on his right foreleg, his eyes unfocused as he spent the last few moments reflecting on his life. With a slow blink he came back to reality, letting out a massive breath through his nostrils. Raising his head up, he started to collect his magical energy, as his thoughts ran rampant. I will not go quietly into the abyss without so much as a whimper. I will find a worthy human to inherit my power and will, just like some of these younger dragons. With his final thought, he let the completely gathered magic surge and coat his body, turning the whole of it into a giant, glowing beacon of white light. An ancient, unnamed magic surrounded the dragon before it dissipated into nothingness, leaving the cave that was his lair empty of his presence except for his impressive hoard. Naruto and Obito found themselves tumbling through what appeared to be a winding tunnel, lined with purple and blue cosmic ether. Neither had any sense of up, down, left, or right. All they knew was pain, as their bodies felt like they were being torn apart. Suddenly, both of the men found themselves righted, finally having a sense of up, as from further down the tunnel came a brilliant, golden light. Naruto's eyes widened in amazement, the feeling of being torn apart passing. Looking to his left, he noticed Obito looking just as amazed. Turning his attention back to the approaching light, they were stunned when a figure appeared. Both men knew what it was from fairy tales from long ago. It was a dragon. It seemed just as surprised to see them, as they were it, as it came to a halt on its path before them, hovering in nothingness it surveyed them. A golden tendril extended toward both men, before entering their foreheads. To Naruto, it felt as if an ancient, wise presence was sifting through his memories. Whatever this dragon was, it felt natural and soothing. Almost as if he was channeling nature chakra. So he let it do as it wished, welcoming it into his subconscious. He was filled with a sense of warmth and calm. It felt as if the dragon was trying to be delicate and polite, as if it was weighing his choices in life. As it dug through his childhood, he felt as if the dragon was laughing at his antics, and weeping with him in his loneliest times. It watched his ups and downs, saw his dreams and loves. After what felt like hours, he felt the dragon had accepted him. "Give me your power. It belongs to me," came Obito's voice as he reached for the white tendril as it left his head. Seeing the hostility, the glowing dragon reared its head back and with a mighty roar, blasted the Uchiha out of the tunnel with a cone of lightning into the ether of space and time. With the evil Uchiha taken care of, the dragon turned its attention to Naruto. As if sensing his hesitance, the dragon broadcasted an aura of calm, before with a mighty roar, it flew at Naruto. His eyes widened in fear as the dragon flew directly at Naruto. He watched as it neared him, and with nowhere to run, he awaited his fate. As the being neared, his body erupted in new pain. This time it felt like his body was having a piece of it ripped off. He watched as Kurama was pulled from his body forcibly. Naruto turned his gaze to the surprised and fearful face of Kurama as he too was blasted through the wall into the swirling nether. Following the gigantic fox, a haze of blue erupted from his stomach. This time it felt like his life was going to end as he watched the chakra that had been his leave. Just before he felt like he was going to perish, the dragon flew into his body, becoming absorbed and replacing his chakra as his life source. A surge of power washed through Naruto's body. Naruto's eyes widened as he felt a well of foreign power within his body. Suddenly, there was a huge explosion of this new energy in his body. With a huge roar, his back arched as lightning crackled around his form. His skin changed and adopted bright golden scales, his canines lengthened, and his fingers sprouted talons. Almost as fast as the surge erupted within him, it stopped. His body fell limp as he lost consciousness, and he spiraled along on his journey through the tunnel of swirling nether. In a brilliant display of lightning and swirling light, a portal started to form in the sky outside the town of Magnolia in the Kingdom of Fury. It drew the attention of all who were outside this day. The intensity of the glow was only eclipsed by that of the sun on the bright afternoon. Among those that were entranced by the glow were most of the mages of the guild known as Fairy Tail. Makarov stood on the roof of the guild hall of Fairy Tail with two other people. His diminutive stature was dwarfed by the other two, and his bright orange suit stood out in contrast to the other's darker tones. Both of them were S-class mages, the mysterious man from another dimension, Mistogen, and his grandson Laxus. Mistogen was of average build and height, though most of that was obscured behind a long black cloak, white bandages on his extremities, a camouflage face mask, and a bandana with a metal plate on the forehead. On his back was a single stave. It was one of the sources for his arsenal of spells. Laxus was almost the complete opposite of Mistogen. He was very tall, with spiky blonde hair. He wore a pair of magic headphones that were spiked on the outside. He had a scar over his right eye in the shape of a lightning bolt. He had a scowl set on his face, his brows furrowed in a permanent scowl. He wore a long, black coat about his shoulders that had fur along the collar and down the opening. His arms were crossed over a brownish shirt with patches of leopard-like spots. His pants were a burgundy, and covered his silver boots. All three of the powerful men watched the developing spectacle. After a few minutes, Makarov directed a question at Mistogen without taking his eyes off the phenomenon. Is it an anima? Mistogen hesitated for a second before speaking. No, it doesn't have the same signature as one. Plus, he pointed to the swirling mass, the rotation is wrong. It's not censoring up into the air, but rather swirling to the ground. It's definitely magical, Laxus remarked. That lightning isn't natural. Makarov stared at whatever it was analyzing it. He was silent for a few minutes before speaking again. I would like you two to follow me. I want to get the first look at whatever comes out of that. It might potentially be harmful, and I might need your assistance in dealing with it. Mistogen only nodded in response while Laxus scoffed, but grunted in agreement. With that, all three jumped from the roof of Fairy Tale and took off for the convergence point of the vortex. The group of 3 Fairy Tale mages was still about a kilometer away from where the opening of the vortex was. All were moving at a decent clip. Makarov was able to keep up easily despite his short stature and age. As they drew near, a loud roar drew them to a halt. 6 eyes were drawn immediately upward. It seemed as if the lightning was picking up, and a glow could be seen approaching from within the tunnel. We better pick up the pace. Makarov started to speak, unless he was cut off as an immense magical force came crashing down upon them like a wave. Mistogen was forced to a knee from the surprise of it. Laxus visibly tensed his body to remain upright, and Makarov's own magic flared on instinct to keep him upright. As quickly as it appeared, it vanished. All 3 men relaxed and Mistogen returned to his standing position. Mistogen looked at the other 2 accompanying him. We better hurry, whatever it is, it's coming. A censored sure grin spread across Laxus' lips, and with a leap, his lightning magic encapsulated him, and he shot towards where the vortex would be depositing its contents. Laxus, get back here! Makarov cried in vain, only to have his attention redrawn to the sky, where the light grew brighter. From the mouth of the hole in the sky, a crackling, electric dragon's head emerged. It was a magnificent beast, an imposing beast. With a roar, it disappeared, and from the mouth of the vortex, a comet-like object shot down to the earth. Mistogen and Makarov both watched as it neared the tops of the trees, briefly disappearing before a shuddering quake passed beneath their feet. Without any words between the mages, the remaining 2 guild members jolted towards the crash site in a full sprint. Naruto's eyes fluttered open, just in time to see a dazzling display of light before him. His mind was clouded and his vestibular sense had finally kicked in, and he had a sense of what was up and down, and he was currently heading for the latter. His eyes widened as he burst through the light, only to see the very fast approaching ground. He couldn't even scream in fright before a searing headache shot through his skull. Lightning Dragon's thunder drop. A voice. He heard a voice. It came from inside his head. Along with the voice and words came a vision, like he was watching himself perform the move. He saw his body accumulating the electrical energy flowing within him and then releasing it just before hitting the ground, causing a repulsion effect that left his body unharmed, as well as discharging the gathered magic in a circle around him for up to 20 feet. After processing the vision, which only took half a second, he reacted, righting himself in midair, and gathering the needed magic before his body was encased in electricity and he plummeted straight to the ground at terminal velocity. Just before impact, due to his ingrained reflexes, he released the energy at the precise time and found himself crouched in a 40-foot wide, 15 feet deep crater. He looked around absently, not really taking in all that was around him. It seems he had landed in a forest. And that was all that his addled brain would compute. It seemed he was having a short in his brain somewhere. As he stood, blankly staring at the forest, a shooting pain throbbed through his head. He raised both hands and grasped at his blonde locks. A pained groan was all that he could manage. Inside his head all of his thoughts were a jumble of nonsense. It was hard to even grasp a single thought, not even a memory was able to be held down long enough to process it. Naruto stumbled around inside of his crater as he felt knowledge siphoned out of his head, only to be replaced with new. It was as if they were his own, yet he could say he never lived it. Or at least he didn't remember living it. His attention was drawn to the rim of the crater as a voice called out to him. Up top he saw a tall man with spiky blonde hair, like his own, yet unlike his own. His eyes were a dark color that he couldn't make out, and his clothes looked very strange. He glanced at his own clothing and noticed that there was a whole lot of orange on his legs, but not a whole lot else. His body was covered in dirt, maybe from the landing. He was sore, but not painfully so, just like he had intensely worked out. He nicked his lip on one of his long, sharp canines. He really should have been used to them after having them for so long. Or had he? His mind was still a mass of unknown to himself. Hey, I'm talking to you, punk. Hearing that, Naruto looked back up to the person talking, and looked at him strangely. He knew those words, but what did they mean? Give me a moment, I'm having a problem remembering, he called back, yet looked like the guy up top had no clue what he was talking about. Speak real words, not nonsense. Laxus commanded. I am, you ass. I said give me a minute. Naruto yelled back as another spear of pain shot through his skull. I'll teach you to call me an ass. Laxus said with anger in his eyes, clearly understanding one of the words Naruto said. Take this. And with that yell, he launched a lightning bolt at Naruto that closed in very fast. Electric drain. As with the thunder drop, a voice appeared in his head. Following the visions that appeared rapidly, he raised his right hand as if to catch the bolt of lightning, only for it to be absorbed into his arm. Both of the blondes watched as the lightning bolt was absorbed by the blonde, and when it was fully absorbed, his arms crackled with blue electricity. Naruto looked at his hands in wonder, before turning to the stunned Laxus with a smirk as another vision filled his head. Here's payback, asshole, Alpha Bolt. Naruto snarled at Laxus, unleashing his own bolt of lightning at the other blonde man. Unlike Laxus, his lightning was blue, and Laxus was almost too distracted by his absorption technique that he almost didn't react in time to dodge the lightning that was thrown at him. With a smirk, Laxus shrugged off his coat. You wanna fight lightning with lightning, I'll give you more than you can handle. His body erupted into motion, becoming consumed in lighting and shooting off at extreme speeds at Naruto in the crater. Naruto didn't need to follow Laxus with his eyes to see where he was going to be. It was telegraphed by the lightning that surrounded the blonde. A regular mage couldn't sense it, but due to his training with $*, he could read it almost like a book. What he didn't expect, however, is that power behind the kick that was launched at him that he blocked with his crossed forearms. He was sent flying with widened eyes. He braced himself for impact, as his body collided with the bank of the crater. Dust was once again kicked up, and Laxus' vision was obscured. Take that, punk. From within the cloud of dust, Naruto erupted, his hands covered in arcing blue electricity. In a split second, he was upon Laxus, who was pushed on the defensive as Naruto swung with electrified fists, intent on bringing him down. It seemed his gigawatt blade was only good enough to enhance his strength against his attacker, seeing as how all he was doing was pushing him back. Granted, the taller man's eyes were wide in surprise, but he was still able to endure his onslaught. With a cry he called out his next attack, Lightning Dragon's Iron Fist. His fist erupted on contact with Laxus' crossed arms, sending a conical storm of lightning into the taller man's body, this time sending him careening into the crater's side with a crash. Naruto watched intently for any sign of his attacker rising. He didn't let his guard up, but it didn't prepare him for the lightning erupting beneath his feet. He was enshrouded by lightning that was biting at his skin, and propelling him into the air. He was launched 60 feet into the air, his body stinging from the lightning biting at his skin. He glanced at the ground as he rose, only to see Laxus standing, a scowl on his face, yet not pursuing. He was underestimating the blonde in the air. As he reached his apex, he began to gather electricity into his limbs. Bringing them in close, he started his free fall back to earth feet first. He aimed his body at Laxus, whose eyes widened, before trying to jump away, only for Naruto to impact scant feet from Laxus, letting his thunder drop burst forth. The shockwave caught Laxus and sent him tumbling through the air. He was able to right himself and land like a cat, only to have to move as from Naruto's mouth came the words, "Lightning Dragon's Roar." And a large eruption of blue lightning came barreling at him. "You want to play that way?" Laxus growled out, as he began to gather his power. His upper body bulged and his shirt was ripped off as flesh-colored scales emerged on his arms. "Take this, Lightning Dragon's Roar." Naruto's eyes widened as his attack came barreling straight at him. Only this one was a few times stronger than his own. Another vision erupted in his mind along with the voice again. Polarity Shield. Raising his right hand palm out, a shield of shimmering blue electricity roughly his size appeared between him and Laxus' attack. Naruto was completely engulfed in the amazingly strong blast. As the lightning died down, Laxus could see Naruto standing with his arm outstretched. His body was trembling from the strain of keeping the shield up for so long against something so powerful. Naruto rose to his full height, and glared at the taller blonde in front of him. Just as the blonde before him, he started to gather his magical power too. "I can do it too, asshole," Naruto snarled. And like Laxus, his power started to roll off him in waves. His forearms gained golden scales, his fingernails became talons, and his jaw gained scales along it. Blue lightning crackled around him, the air being energized by him. "Bring it on," Laxus roared at him, as both men started to gather the magic required for the attack. In unison, both cried the name of the attack, Lightning Dragon's Roar. Both attacks met each other midway across the crater. The brilliant gold of Laxus' attack met and was matched by Naruto's raging blue. Both tried to overpower the other, only for the colors to swirl and battle for dominance in the center. That was the scene that Makarov and Mistogen both happened upon. They both had to shield their eyes from the intensity of the light being emitted. Eventually the attacks culminated in a large explosion, kicking up a lot of dust and dirt, obscuring the two fighters. When it finally settled and blew away with the breeze, it showed both the blondes lying on their backs, embedded in the crater wall. Both were covered in dirt from head to toe, and both were cringing in pain. Eventually the blonde opposite Laxus began to get to his feet, shakily. "You see that? That's what a real dragon can do. Looks like I win this round," Naruto smirked cheekily. He started to chuckle, but was cut short as a shock of pain seared his brain, this time more intense than before. He clutched his head and let out a pained scream before collapsing to the ground unconscious. Seeing this, Makarov and Mistogen ran into the crater, Makarov to his grandson, and Mistogen to the unconscious blonde. Mistogen immediately began assessing the blonde's injuries. Makarov went up to Laxus with a frown. "What were you thinking, you idiot? You could have killed him. Did you at least get his name before you started a fight against him?" Laxus only groaned at the chewing out he was starting to receive as he pushed himself out of his earthen bed. "You don't need someone's name to fight them. Besides, he was all right. He could probably handle anything I throw at him. He's a good fighter," he said as he stood. His body ached all over. Most of the power in that attack was his opponent's, and it was very potent. "He's like Natsu." Surprise was evident in Makarov's eyes. "A dragon slayer. Is he affiliated with any guild?" "I don't think so. I didn't see any marks on him. But that doesn't mean that he doesn't have it on his tongue like Bixlo," the leader of the Thunder God tribe remarked about one of his followers. Makarov's mind started to go into overdrive. What could this mean? The boy looked as old as Natsu did. How was it that he didn't have any guild affiliations? It was surprising that a dragon slayer wasn't swooped up by some guild. They were very powerful, and had the potential to be even more so. Laxus could see the gears turning in his grandfather's mind. "You're thinking of inviting him to join the guild, aren't you?" "Only if he wants to," Makarov stated. "I don't want to force him to join." Laxus cast a glance at the unconscious blonde that Mistogen was hefting onto his shoulder. "You better try your hardest to get him to join. Maybe having some powerful new member our guild won't be looked down on by the council or anyone else." HMPH, you know Fairy Tail doesn't care what people think of us, Makarov frowned. PSH, when I'm guild master there'll be changes, Laxus scowled watching Mistogan come to stand beside them. We better get him to Perliuzica, Mistogan informed the men. He's got a fever and is trembling. Makarov nodded and the group left, with Laxus leaving Makarov and Mistogan to get his opponent to the old healer. It was an unknown amount of time later that Naruto awoke. He was groggy, his head was killing him, and his stomach desired some much-needed sustenance. His eyes fluttered open as he sat up and looked around. He was in a bed that had orange sheets, in a house that looked to be made in the inside of a tree if the bark on the interior walls was any indication. There was a bookshelf in front of him, full of books, a few windows around the room, as well as a desk and chair across the room. There also seemed to be a flower bed inside the house. It was very cozy. He swung his legs out of the bed and went to stand, and almost toppled over. His whole body was sore and protested the action. He noticed that he was standing only in his underwear, and looked around for his clothes, but couldn't find any. Nearby he saw a pair of sweatpants and a white t-shirt. Below them was a pair of sandals. He looked at them and it seemed that they would fit him, so he slipped the pants and t-shirt on before sliding his toes around the strap that held the sandals on his feet. He then walked over to the sink that he saw off in the corner and ran some water and drank it straight from the tap, seeing as he couldn't immediately see a cup and didn't want to be rude. A flash of pink caught his eye as it made its way across a window. It looked like someone's hair, pulled into a bun. He made his way to the door to see if he couldn't find this person and ask them his whereabouts. He exited and was greeted with the sight of an old, fairly tall, thin woman sweeping the grass. Hearing the door open, she turned towards the sound and was greeted with the sight of her latest patient. A frown marred her face. You're finally awake. About time. I was getting tired of taking care of you, Perliuzica told the blonde. Sorry for burdening you, ma'am. Perliuzica. The old woman stated her name, interrupting the blonde in the process. I'm sorry, Naruto asked confused. That's my name, so use it, she said harshly. Oh, I'm Naruto Namikaze. Nice to meet you Perliuzica-san, Naruto said extending his hand to shake hers. Her eyes just narrowed and looked at the offered hand like it was diseased. Naruto, seeing that she wasn't going to shake his hand, lowered it and offered an embarrassed smile. So, how did I end up here in your home? He asked, unsure if it was indeed her home. She stared at him for a moment before scoffing. HMPH. That idiot, Makarov, brought you here 5 days ago. He says you fell from the sky, and that you and his grandson got in a small scuffle. Scuffle, Naruto thought to himself. Then it came rushing back to him. He had been trying out one of his new techniques and ended up landing in the forest, causing a crater. He then ran into that blonde bastard that used lightning magic, and his own techniques. That bastard, where's he at? I'm gonna kick his ass for stealing my moves. Perliuzica reacted by lashing out with her broom and smacking him on the head. Shut up. You humans are disgusting, loud creatures. This caused Naruto to cower slightly. He watched her calm down, but she didn't lose her scowl. Makarov will probably want to know you're awake, and since you seem to be in good enough condition to walk, I'll take you to the guild hall of Fairy Tail. Naruto could only nod in agreement as she leaned her broom against her house and started out of the clearing where her house was. He followed a few paces behind her, and took in the beauty of the forest. It didn't take long at all for them to reach the outskirts of Magnolia and the Fairy Tail Guild Hall that stood prominently before them. It looked like a pagoda, with 3 tiers. The roof was tiled, and the walls were whitewashed. The back was next to the creek that ran through Magnolia Town, and not too far away was a bridge that Perliuzica was heading towards. After crossing the bridge, it only took a few more minutes before they came to the front of the building. Above the entrance was the name of the guild, yet Perliuzica paid no heed to it, and kept walking forward, pushing open one of the 2 doors to the hall. Inside, the hall was composed of mostly wood. Thick, wooden beams acted as the central structure of the hall. There were 4 rows of tables, 2 on either side of the main thoroughfare, each row 8 deep. Naruto was impressed. It wasn't over the top, but it felt homey. All around the tables various people sat. He didn't recognize a single one of them. Perliuzica kept walking, through all of the people sitting at the tables and the various employed waitresses serving the patrons. Naruto noticed he was getting quite a few looks from a lot of the people sitting around, but he had no time to ponder this as he had to keep following Perliuzuka as she was now climbing a set of stairs that lead to a small balcony and a door on said balcony. Without knocking, she pushed the door open and Naruto followed and closed the door behind him. Inside was a cozy office. All around the room were bookshelves filled top to bottom with books, some resting on small end tables, and some on chairs, and even some stacked on the floor almost as high as some as the bookcases. Behind the large desk in the room was a very small man with very ostentatious clothing, sitting on a stack of books so that he could see over the edge of the desk. In his hands was a pipe that he was packing tobacco into. He looked up from what he was doing to glare at whoever barged in unannounced, only to soften his expression at seeing his old teammate. "Ah, Perliuzuka, looking lovely as ever. How may I assist you today?" Makarov asked pleasantly. "The one you dropped off woke up. He's your problem now," and with her message delivered with cold indifference, she turned, brushing past Naruto and left the office. Said blonde watched her go and then turned to face the old man who was appraising him with a soft expression. "Is she always so cold?" Naruto asked the older mage. Makarov just chuckled in response. "I've known her since we were kids, and I have to say, yes, she has always been that way. She's a really caring person, she just is better when it's one-on-one, and she doesn't have to put up with a lot of people." "Ah, I see," Naruto said with a nod. A slightly uncomfortable silence reigned in the room, at least to Naruto it was uncomfortable. Not liking silence, he cleared his throat. "So, you're the guild master." Makarov nodded in response and held out his hand for a handshake. "Master Makarov Drayar, 3rd Guild Master of Fairy Tail. A pleasure to make your acquaintance." "Naruto Namikaze," Naruto said taking the offered appendage. Both men shared a hearty handshake and Makarov gestured to the open seat, so Naruto took the open one across the desk from him. "I'd like to thank you for taking me to Perliuzuka-san to get healed. I'm very grateful, and I'm sorry if I may have harmed your grandson," he remarked looking sheepish. His worries were assuaged as Makarov smiled and gave a dismissive wave. "Water under the bridge. Besides, he told me he was the first one to strike. You were just defending yourself, so I should apologize for his actions. Don't think that they reflect all of Fairy Tail." "Oh, no, never," Naruto assured the old man. "Though I'd like to have another crack at him. Move-stealing bastard," he muttered under his breath, but not low enough so that Makarov missed it. "Move-stealing?" Makarov questioned with a raised eyebrow. Naruto blushed at being heard and scratched his head in embarrassment. Well, he used a move that should only be able to be used by someone that was trained like I was, so I don't understand how he could do it." "What do you mean by how you were trained?" Makarov questioned, already knowing the answer. "Well, I'm a dragon slayer. I was trained by the lightning dragon." He stopped suddenly. He got a confused look on his face. He couldn't remember his foster parent's name. The dragon raised him for nearly 12 years, and he couldn't remember his name. That was troubling to him. He looked at Makarov, visibly distressed. "I don't remember his name." "It might have something to do with your head and the fall you had," Makarov said. "You took quite a plunge. I mean you were dropped out of the sky from a swirling vortex. Maybe you fell hard enough and got some memory loss." Naruto nodded in agreement, but it did nothing to help his fear of not remembering his dragon parent's name. "But I remember everything else." "Well, let's see what you do remember. Let's see if your oldest memories are intact. When were you born?" "October 10th, Naruto asked himself, before nodding. "Yeah, October 10th, the year X7, X7. "It's okay. How old are you? We can work that out that way." Makarov smiled at the boy. "I'm 18, Naruto stated. "Then that means you were born October 10th, X765, since it's May 3rd, X784, Makarov informed the young man. "Do you know why you were speaking gibberish when we found you?" "Huh?" Naruto questioned. "When we found you, you were speaking gibberish with only a few coherent words that any of us could understand." "I don't know what you're talking about. I only know plain English that we're speaking now. My foster parent taught me," Naruto informed Makarov. The older man just nodded in understanding. "I believe you," so do you know what that portal was that you fell out of? Naruto strained his brain and could only come up with one explanation. I don't know what you mean by portal. I was trying a new technique and didn't realize how high I was when I accidentally let it go and fell to the ground. Makarov nodded in approval. He didn't think that Naruto's memories were actually true, but that they were what his mind conjured up for him to deal with what happened to him. He pulled his pipe out of his mouth and snuffed the flame with his thumb. Have you put any thought into what you will do now that you are recovered? Naruto adopted a thinking pose for a minute, before nodding. Well, I would like to repay Perliuzuka-san for taking care of me, and I would like to repay you as well, for bringing me to her so I could get treated. Makarov waved a dismissive hand again. No need to repay me, my boy. I did just what I thought would be right. With a calculating look in his eye he posed another question. You're not affiliated with any guild, are you, Naruto-kun? The blonde responded with a shake of his head. No, I never really felt the need to. I mean, I have a fairly good amount of riches that was left behind by my foster parent. The elder just nodded his head. I see. If I extended an invitation to join our family, what would you say? This took the blonde by surprise. Well, I would be honored that you would offer, but... You know, Makarov started before swiveling his chair and looking out the window behind his desk. Laxus expressed hope that you would join. He expressed his desire to fight you again, and it would be a lot easier to track you down if you were here, with us. Sparks seemed to dance in Naruto's eyes at the mention of battling Laxus again. So, that bastard wants a rematch, huh? Well, let's go. We'll settle his move-stealing ways here and now. Actually, he and his team have gone on a mission. They won't be back for a month or two, Makarov said with a shrewd smile that Naruto couldn't see. Said blonde bristled. Well, I guess I'll just have to join up then. I got a bone to pick with that bastard. Makarov swiveled back around, a grin plastered on his face. Glad to hear it. Let's get this all official then. And just like that, Naruto had been censored into joining up with Fairy Tail, thinking it was his own idea in the first place. An hour later, Naruto emerged from the guild master's office, Makarov in tow. He had gotten the guild stamp placed on his left shoulder in a bright orange that stood out against his skin and could be seen through his t-shirt. The pair made their way to the bar, where the resident barkeep, Mirajan, was returning with a platter full of cups. Her big blue eyes widened before closing with her smile. Good afternoon, master, she said with a small bow, inadvertently giving Naruto a better glimpse at her impressive chest that was confined behind her elegant red dress. She righted herself and turned her smile to Naruto, who couldn't help but return it to the beauty. Who is this? This is our newest member, Makarov told the woman. Naruto Namikaze. Naruto introduced himself, extending his hand to shake hers. She grasped his, and he was amazed at just how small and soft her hands felt in his. Mirajan Strauss, but everyone just calls me Mira, she smiled kindly to Naruto. They then disengaged their handshake as she clasped her hands in front of her chest. Please allow me to be the first to formally welcome you to Fairy Tail. I hope that you have a good time and that we can all find a new friend in you. Naruto blushed and scratched his cheek at her exuberance. Well, thank you very much. I hope to make many friends during my time as well. Makarov, satisfied that he was already making friends with his new fellow guild mates, turned to Mira. Please see to it that a tab is opened in his name. We'll run a tab until you get some money in your hands. Okay, Naruto-kun. Naruto nodded, feeling sheepish. Okay. I can go get some money, though. I just have to return to my home. It'll be about a full day's round trip from here. Makarov raised his dismissive hand again. There's no rush, Naruto-kun. We're a family here, and we take care of our own. Please, you must be tired still from your stay with Perliuzuka, so take a few days, make some friends, then we can start to worry about money and jobs and such. Naruto could only nod his head at the old man. He watched as the old man returned to his office, then turned back to the beautiful waitress that was giving him her attention. So what would you like, Naruto-kun? Mira asked as she pulled out a menu from beneath the counter. I'll have. It was 3 hours later that found Naruto sitting at the bar, his back resting against it, a mug of amber liquid in his right hand. Over the last 3 hours, He had talked with Mira as she came back to the bar after dispensing the orders that kept coming in from all of the thirsty and hungry patrons. He could say that she was his first official friend in Fairy Tail. They had talked about anything and everything that came to mind. He learned that she was an S-class mage, despite the fact that she rarely, if ever, went on missions anymore. She preferred to stay at the guild hall and take care of all of the people visiting and returning home. She said that there was nothing like seeing at least one friendly and familiar face in the guild. He also learned that she was very adept at transformation magic, which she used to impress him by transforming her face into that of his. It was weird seeing himself with womanly curves, but it didn't feel like he hadn't seen something similar before. He told her that he was a dragon slayer, seeing as she shared her skill with him. It surprised him when she said that there were now 2 dragon slayers in Fairy Tail. So, if you're a dragon slayer, what element do you have control over? Mira asked, wanting to know all about him. Naruto simply held up a hand and generated a small bit of blue lightning around his hands, manipulating the current so that it took on the symbol of Fairy Tail. Lightning, he replied with a smile. She smiled back at him. Wow, now not only do we have 2 dragon slayers, we also have 2 lightning element mages. Don't remind me, Naruto scowled. Miragen just censored her head to the left in curiosity. You know Laxus. Naruto let out an undignified snort. Yeah, I know that move-stealing bastard. Next time I see him, he'll get his rematch, and then some. Mira was now even more confused, but just nodded in agreement before excusing herself to give out more orders. He then noticed another presence slide up to his opposite side. Turning, his eyes widened in surprise at the state of dress, or was it undress, of the girl that sat down next to him. She wore nothing but sandals, capris, and a bikini top. There was also a strap of a small satchel that hung at her left hip that followed the valley of her rather large sensors. Her guild stamp stood out prominently close to her left hip on her lower abdomen. Her long, brown hair hung in sheets around her shoulders. A red flush was very noticeable across her pretty face. The large amount of alcohol sitting at the table in the direction from which she came must have been the culprit for that. She smiled coquettishly at him, causing him to blush a bit. So, did I hear right and you implied that you fought Laxus and survived? She asked with a dazzling smile. Not just survived, I won. If I hadn't passed out from a really bad headache, he'd be in the hospital still. That smug bastard, Naruto said with a scowl. The beautiful brunette's eyes widened in appreciation of his accomplishment. To say she was surprised was an understatement. She let out a small whistle. Wow. You must be pretty powerful to take on one of Fairy Tail's strongest and come out on top. Besides the master, Laxus is the second strongest in Fairy Tail. Really? Naruto asked in surprise. That arrogant bastard is that powerful? The girl just nodded and took a sip of her beer. She set it down and extended her hand to Naruto. I'm Kana Alberona, by the way. Naruto Namikaze. Naruto smiled back, shaking her hand that felt really similar to Myra's. So, are you a mage, Kana? Kana nodded in response, pulling out her deck of magic cards. Yep, I use card magic. With these I can divine the future, to an extent, and cast some pretty devastating spells. Naruto whistled in appreciation. That's cool. I'm a lightning dragon slayer, he smiled. This stunned the beautiful brunette. Another one. Natsu's gonna flip when he hears this, Kana smirked. Who's Natsu? Naruto questioned. He's the fire dragon slayer of Fairy Tail, came Myra's voice from behind him. Tilting his head so he could see the barmaid, she continued. He and Happy are following a lead that they got. Some guy calling himself Salamander has been seen somewhere to the north. Natsu thinks that it might be Igneel, the dragon that raised Natsu. Naruto nodded. That made sense. He took a sip of the beer in his hand and set it down on the counter. He then looked at both of the beautiful ladies who were both looking at him. He decided to tease the girls and see how they reacted when he turned the Namikaze charm up to 11. So, what did I do to earn the honor of being the center of attention of 2 very beautiful women? Kana smirked in response, very used to having many guys hit on her. Mira just smiled with a bit of a flush on her face, also used to having men hit on her, but not used to being called beautiful. Kana took another swig of beer before answering. Hey now, I usually charge for people to be in my company before getting to know them fully. So count your blessings that you're good looking and I won't charge you for that. It had been a long time since Naruto had been complimented on his looks, which caused him to blush. It seemed his plan was backfiring. Well, unlike Kana, I have thoroughly enjoyed our time spent together, so I can say that you have earned my attention with your beautiful personality, Mira said with a stunning smile, her blush still in place. Naruto buried his embarrassed blush by taking another drink. Well, it looks like my plan to tease you both has backfired spectacularly. Kudos. He then raised his glass to both of the women in surrender and a salute. This caused Kana to laugh and Mirajan to giggle demurely. Kana decided that it was her turn to tease him. So, I've been wondering, where did you get those whisker-like marks? They're birthmarks, Naruto said pointing at his face. Well, I think they're very cute, Kana said, reaching out to him and rubbing her hand across his cheek. Her eyes widened in surprise. What the hell? They're actually embedded in your skin. Naruto's eyes widened and jerked back, a huge blush on his face. It felt really good. Careful now, they're really sensitive. He then felt another hand rub his face, this time it was Mira's. Her fingers danced lightly across the marks and gently traced them. A soft groan escaped Naruto's lips. His eyes rolled back into his head and he pushed his cheek into Mira's hand a little more. Suddenly a deep, soft rumble escaped from deep within Naruto's chest. This caused Mira to stop and Kana to look at him astounded. Naruto froze in embarrassment. Both women shared a look before Mira voiced her question, Naruto, did you just purr? Naruto just retracted his face from Mira's hand and tried to drown himself in his beer. His face was a brilliant crimson. It felt good, he murmured, yet both women could hear. With a squeal, Mira pulled Naruto halfway across the bar and planted his face in her bosom. That is so cute, Mira gushed as she held his face between her sensors with her arms wrapped around his head in a hug. Kana couldn't help but grin mischievously. Hey, Elfman, the new guy's putting the moves on your sister. She called across the hall. Naruto managed to free himself in time to hear a loud what? Exclamation mark. From across the hall and watched as a giant of a man came barreling toward the bar. Yep, it looked like Naruto was fitting in already. It was with great haste that Naruto rushed through the forest. He didn't slow as he weaved around trees, leapt over boulders, and charged through brooks. His face was set in a determined scowl, his brows furrowed in fury. He would not be the one to let evil escape. He would bring down his wrath upon those that would bring harm unto others, and he would feel no remorse in delivering their punishment. His thoughts drifted to his friends and what could happen to them if he let them down. His body seemed to blur even more and static seemed to crackle behind him as he pushed himself faster and harder than before. It was within only a few more minutes that Naruto broke into a clearing with a dilapidated building that looked like a church standing within. There was an overgrown and unattended graveyard nearby that confirmed the building's identity as a church. Most of the headstones and grave markers were old and worn down by the elements, some having crumbled from overgrowth or vandalism. From within he could feel many presences. Each of them contained magical power flowing through them, and all of them seemed to have a fair amount, less than that of the swordsman that he fought just a little bit ago, but still a good amount. He cracked his knuckles in preparation for his assault and charged the front doors. With electricity crackling across his knuckles, he slammed his fist into the old, wooden doors. With an explosion of magical energy, the doors imploded into the church, flying off their hinges and colliding with a few unsuspecting mages as they continued on their path. Surprised cries and screams filled the air as the light burst through with the doors. Many people had to cover their eyes so that they could see into the light. Who the hell did that? A random member screamed, his rat skull guild stamp showing on his left cheek. As if shrouded in a halo, Naruto strode through the doorway, the light giving him an almost ethereal glow. As he stepped into where the light wasn't shining so brightly, Demon's Tongue got their first look at the man who would bring the full weight of his wrath down upon them. Sparks jumped from him to random metal pieces around him as his power boiled within. He stopped his approach and leveled a finger at the entire guild. I want answers, Demon's Tongue, and I'm going to get it. In response to his declaration, a brave or stupid mage shouted from the back, censored you. Naruto lowered his hand before smirking, I knew you'd say that. With a burst of speed, he appeared, with his fist buried in some poor sap's face. After the realization of what had transpired set in, chaos broke loose. Levi stood in the Rune Knight's tent, hers and Naruto's packs acting as a seat as she sat staring into a magical projection of Miragen, who was listening as Levi recounted the events leading up to when Naruto had left. So what do I do now, Mira? I don't want to leave Naruto alone and without backup, Levi said with a worried expression across her cute face. Mira didn't respond, letting her thoughts run. She looked like she was going to speak before she looked to her left. Oh. Master, thank goodness you're back. We have a situation. Levi heard Makarov's voice. Did something happen with Levi's team? No, Levi and Naruto went on a delivery mission, and it turns out a dark guild has intertwined themselves with it, Miragen said, giving Makarov the short version. Suddenly, Myra's face vanished as Makarov's concerned visage occupied the hologram. What happened, Levi-chan? Are you all right? Where's Naruto? Makarov asked, being the concerned parent type that he was. We're fine, Master, Levi replied. A dark guild attacked the person we delivered the package to. Evidently it was research on the whereabouts of a powerful magic artifact, a book I think it was. Makarov's eyes looked grim. Levi, I want you and Naruto to stay put. I'll have Urza head your way, and she'll take care of this dark guild. Levi started to chuckle nervously before scratching the back of her head in embarrassment. Well, there's a tiny little problem with that. You see, Naruto actually ran ahead. He said that he couldn't let them get away with what they had done. It was silent in the tent for a few seconds as Levi watched Makarov process that bit of information. Slowly, red started to seep into his face as his eyebrows drew together. The entire image started to shake as Makarov cried out, "He did what?" And with a flash of light, the other end of the transmission went silent. Levi stared at the communication lacrima for a few minutes more before stowing it in her satchel. She slumped back into the makeshift chair. Her shoulders slumped as she was ordered to just simply wait again. Wait for rescue to come and get her. It really annoyed her that she wasn't as strong as others, but at the same time, she didn't know what could be done to help her out. She thought to Naruto and how he just reacted, not even giving a thought to his own personal safety, only that of others. He was a truly virtuous person. Maybe she would ask him to help her better herself. It was a good idea. They both would better themselves when they got home after Urza got there. Levi suddenly froze up at the thought that Urza was going to be their backup. Suddenly, running off and getting mangled by a dark guild was sounding like a better option than facing Urza. With a groan of suffering to come, she reached into her pack that held the books she took from the cave and started reading it. Oh well, if she was going to get punished, she'd at least like to go out while doing her favorite hobby. Naruto stood in the Dark Guild's hall. His eyes looked down at the mass of broken bodies down below. Some of them were unconscious, others simply unable to move. But they were all alive. This would leave them in perfect resting condition. He had gleaned through his chaotic battle that their stronger members had left to go retrieve the artifact in their magic-driven cart. He scowled. Now he had no idea where these guys had left to. He had to find a clue, but first he needed new clothes. He was missing his shirt. It had gotten torn off by a guy who thought that grappling him would be a good idea. Of course, when his guild stamp on his shoulder had been revealed, even more hell had broken out. His pants below his knees had been scorched off, and his legs had slight burns on them from a massive fireball that he blocked with his polarity shield. He didn't have any idea where his sandals had disappeared off to. So, before he was heading out, he was stealing some clothes from the Dark Guild. He went to where he thought their bunks were in the basement of the church. Sure enough, there were bunk beds with wardrobes and footlockers by them. At random, he started rifling through them. He quickly found a pair of navy blue pants that fit, as well as some socks and brown boots. A gray long-sleeved t-shirt finished his ensemble, before he made his way out of the basement. Stepping out of the old church and into the sunlight, Naruto started his looking for a trail to follow. He rushed around to the back of the church where he discovered a shoddy lean-to with wheel ruts in it. He looked down and followed the tracks out, but soon found that that was a foolish endeavor as there were many separate tracks leading multiple different directions. He sniffed, trying to let his enhanced sense of smell catch the scent of people, but it was futile. They hadn't lingered long enough to set a trail. He then immediately dropped to his knee and placed his hand on one wheel track. It was dry, so he moved on. He repeated this for 5 more tracks before coming to one that was slightly wetter than the others, which meant that it was the most fresh. He looked up and followed the trail to the edge of the woods, where an arching opening made for a good wagon-sized pathway. With haste, he followed the path for as long as he could, before the trail was lost in the overgrowth. He cursed in frustration, and allowed his restless energy to pulse. This had an unintended result, as he was able to see a rough outline of a carriage that was green, heading away from his position. It didn't get too far before it disappeared altogether. He was intrigued by this development, and so tried it again. His experiment proved that it wasn't just coincidence as the same effect happened. With a wry smile, he moved before setting off. He hesitated though, as a thought crossed his mind. If backup comes, there won't be any way for them to find the path, he mused, before being struck with an idea. I'll leave them some breadcrumbs to follow. With this thought, he rested his hand on the bark of a nearby tree, before pushing his magic into his hand, allowing his electricity to blast out. This act made some of the bark on the tree explode off, as well as leave a zigzag pattern that resembled a lightning bolt pointing in the direction he was going to head off towards. With a smile on his face, he raced onwards. About every 50 feet or so, he would reach out with his hand as he passed a tree, slapping it against the bark, and leaving another marker for anyone who would be following. Levi sighed, as she tried to read one of the books that she had gotten from Naruto. She had been stuck on the same line for the last 20 minutes, not really reading it as her thoughts were elsewhere. She sighed again, and decided to call it quits. There was no way that she would be able to read in this state anyway. Her thoughts were a cacophony of desires, wishes, deprecation, and loathing. She cursed herself for the 100th time for being as physically and magically weak as she was. She stood up from her perch on her and Naruto's backpacks, stowing her book in hers before standing and stretching. The little hamlet had calmed down since the Rune Knights had left a half-hour ago after their reinforcements had shown up. They had left only scant minutes after Naruto had rushed off. She was alone, and had been instructed to wait for Urza to arrive. With a wistful smile, she raised her head to the sky and watched the passing clouds, feeling sorry for herself. If only she had been more up to the challenge of going after Naruto, maybe then she wouldn't be so sad for what's happened. It all came back to Naruto. He was a member for merely a week, and already she felt like she had found a lifelong friend. The way that he was so sure of himself and his actions had made her feel awkward about herself. She wanted nothing more than to be able to act without thinking like he could. He was the very pinnacle of what it meant to be a fairy tale member, and it. Levi's thoughts were halted as the sound of wood grating on gravel and dirt drew her attention. The source of the noise was a magic-powered carriage. Sitting in the driver's seat was none other than Urza Scarlet, the Titania. She was the most powerful female mage in the guild, seeing how Mirajan no longer did missions, or even exercised her S-rank power. Urza hopped off the carriage, her hard crew's armor glinting in the sunlight. A golden semi-cross and fairy tale symbol both adorned her chest plate. Her hands and arms were covered in gauntlets, the same gleaming metal as her armor. Her legs were unadorned besides a pleated skirt and leather boots that came up to her knee. On her hip was a scabbard and sword, easily within reach should she need it. From the get-go, Levi could tell by her expression that she was not happy. "Where's the Rune Knight commander?" she barked out at a random person. Said man didn't have any time before he was hauled up off his feet by his collar by the irate redhead. She repeated her question, and when no answer was forthcoming, she started shaking the poor man. "Answer me. Urza, over here," Levi called out to her guild-mate and friend, waving her arm for added effect. This served to gain the redhead's attention, who proceeded to promptly drop the man she was holding, and come storming over to her. "Levi," she started in her scolding voice. "Why are you alone? Where is the new member and the Rune Knights?" Levi was scared at the tone she was using, having flashbacks of her childhood. Well, you see, Naruto ran after the Dark Guild before the Rune Knights' reinforcements showed up. He said that he couldn't let Demon's Tongue get too far ahead. This is a really powerful artifact that we're dealing with. Urza frowned before relenting her gaze a bit, yet it was still pretty harsh. That's very noble. Levi smiled at her declaration, but very stupid. He's an untested mage, going against who knows how many dark mages. It was very foolish. Plus there's the affiliation with Tartarus that needed to be considered. And furthermore, Levi felt that Urza was being too hard on Naruto, especially when he wasn't able to defend himself. With a sudden welling of courage, she snapped at Urza, "That's not fair. You don't even know the guy. He's nice, caring, and strong. You weren't even around when he joined. Master says that Naruto fought equally with Laxus, even beat him." That caught Urza's attention. She hadn't heard this piece of information. To have fought Laxus as equals, or to have beaten him, that spoke volumes. Maybe there was no need to worry about the new guy. She stared at Levi, trying to see any sort of lying to protect the new guy. Only seeing slight fear in Levi's eyes from standing up to her, she saw no deception of any kind. She let her harsh gaze soften, knowing that even if she has a reputation for order and structure, she couldn't stay mad at the little brunette. "Okay, I apologize. It's obvious that this new member is a good friend of yours. But still, it wasn't in the guild's or his best interest to run off without help. Hurry, stash your packs in the carriage and we'll be on our way," Urza said, turning to the carriage, but was stopped mid-stride. Levi asked, her small frame struggling to pick up the pack of books. Her eyes were wide with surprise. Urza rounded again, "Yes, you're in this just as much as our new member. It is a duty of fairy tale mages to see out a mission to its end." But you're what? I'm weak." Levi looked despondent, having to admit her faults. "I won't be of any use with them. I can't fight." Urza walked up to Levi and placed her gauntleted hand on her shoulder, the weight of it almost too much for Levi's petite frame. "No one in fairy tale is weak. It doesn't matter whether or not you are physically strong, but the strength of your character. And to everyone back home, you have a very strong character." Levi felt her face heat up at the praise. It had been a long time since Urza last praised her for anything other than being good and not causing trouble in the guild. It was with a determined nod. She and Urza loaded her and Naruto's packs into the magic-powered carriage and climbed in herself. It was only a few more minutes that they were off, charging in the direction of the Rune Knights and their wayward guild member. It was supposed to be a simple job. First they had sacked that magic shop and got the information they needed from the owner. Then the team got back, and without wasting any time, their group, composed of the guild's top members, had left, 16 men strong. It was left to the 3 men who composed the defensive unit of the guild to guard their rear, and the entrance to the cave as well as their carriage. One of the 3's members had been sitting on the carriage, catching flack for reading Sorcerer Weekly. "Why do you read that crap anyway?" a large, tan man asked from on the ground. His most defining feature was that he was missing the middle finger on his left hand, besides standing over 6.5 feet tall. "Hey, you gotta admit that these legal guilds have some pretty hot babes in them," the one sitting on the carriage replied. His defining feature was that he was the smallest of the group, and had no hair, but his head was completely covered in tattoos. He also looked a lot like a toad, with a large, wide mouth and squat face. "Oh, the things I would do to that fairy, Mirajan. She has got one delicious body," he said with a bit of drool dripping from the corner of his mouth. The last member, standing with the really tall man, was the last to speak. He was very large with long, muscled arms crossed, and resting on his overly sized gut. A handle for a very large broad axe rested over his left shoulder, the blade sticking up behind him. "Pretty big talk coming from a virgin," he taunted, putting way more emphasis on the last word than was necessary. He wasn't disappointed when the man on top of the carriage bristled at the barb. "You're one to talk. You've never been with a woman either," the toad-like man said. "It's not like I haven't tried. There's just no women out there who could stand to be around a real man like me," the fat one responded. "Oh, that's rich." The toad started laughing, large guffaws in a nasally, high-pitched manner emanating from his wide mouth. "You wanna go?" the other one responded, drawing his axe into his hands. "I'll make you." "Stop," the tallest of the bunch commanded, his eyes searching the tree line. What's happening?" he was questioned by the toad-like man. The tallest kept scanning the trees, hoping to see something. "I could have sworn I heard something." This statement made the other two start looking around as well, standing at the ready. Several seconds passed in this fashion, before the man with the axe perked up. Did you hear that? Hear Wah's thunder drop. It was as if a bomb had exploded on the carriage. Before anyone really had a chance to react, a shining blue object fell out of the sky, completely obliterating the carriage and sending the man sitting on it flying through the air like a ragdoll, his entire body engulfed with crackling lightning. He was unconscious before he hit the ground. As the object hit the ground, a crater formed as the kinetic energy behind the blast moved outward. The man with the axe fell next, the gust of wind from the epicenter, picking the flat of his blade up, causing it to impact his head with extreme force, instantly rendering him unconscious. The tallest of the group had reacted just barely, throwing up a magical barrier, dampening the effect somewhat, but he was not spared the technique's power. Groaning in pain, the tall man looked at his comrades. Both were down for the count. It was such a powerful attack. He looked at the scattered wreckage that was his guild's carriage. There was no way they would be getting it back together again. He looked back to the crater, seeing a person walking out of it. Blue sparks crackled around his form, and his face was set in a frown. He didn't look very imposing, he was just above 6 foot, and didn't look too strong. A punk like you? The tall man asked through clenched teeth. You've got to be shitting me. That's where they went. Your guild? He asked, nodding his head to the entrance to the cave a few feet away. But you'll have to get through me first. Naruto glanced at the two fallen members before looking back to the tall man. Doesn't sound like a problem to me. They are weak compared to me. Sure, we may be a team, but I am the leader of the group. Demon's Tongue's Bastion is what we were called, and I'm Higar, the Bulwark. My defensive magic is second to none. The man, now identified as Higar, proclaimed as two steel shields appeared on his forearms, magical barriers appearing on the shields. With speed belying his size, he moved in front of the cave entrance and took a firm stance. He raised his arms and banged his shields together, causing the two barriers to grow together, becoming one large one that was as big as the entrance to the cave. Let's see you get through this. Naruto's eyes nodded, before charging his fists with lightning and shooting off at Higar. Launching a straight punch that would have sent anyone flying, he was surprised when the barrier zapped the energy from his fist, and his bare hand crashed into the steel of the shield. Usually, this would have had an effect of still sending his opponent reeling, but instead, it was like he had punched solid steel, and the numbness shooting up to his shoulder told him that doing it again was a bad idea. Kicking off, he landed a few yards away and shook his right arm out to get feeling back into it. Why didn't you go flying? Anyone else would have. Hey, since you'll never get past me, I'll tell you a secret. When I'm defending anything, my body becomes like that of steel. I can hold the same stance and position for hours, without moving a muscle. You'll have a hard time getting me to move. Higar smiled from behind his shields. Without delay, Naruto gathered up magical energy in his lungs, lightning dragon's roar. Unleashing his roar, he concentrated it, so that the energy didn't disperse over a larger area, making it more of a line than a cone. As the lightning barreled at Higar, he didn't catch what the large man said. Naruto watched as the attack impacted the barrier, yet the barrier did not give. He pumped some more power into it and held it for as long as he could before he was unable to any longer. Panting, to get air back in his lungs, he stared on, stunned as his attack seemed to be absorbed into the glowing runes hovering over the shield. Suddenly, the runes went from purple to bright blue. In an instant, Naruto was facing his own attack head-on, only it seemed to be stronger. He wasn't able to erect his own shield in time, and instead, took the full brunt of the attack, only managing to cross his arms across his midsection. Being a dragon slayer, he wasn't hurt by the element, but it didn't mean that he didn't suffer some damage just from the force of the hit alone. He was sent flying back, plowing a ditch along the way, kicking up dust in his wake. How do you like that, boy? Higar questioned, still not having moved an inch. How was that? Did you like a taste of your own medicine? From the dust, Naruto walked out, mostly unscathed. Sure, he was covered in dirt and grass stains, but that stood to reason. His clothes had taken the biggest beating. He no longer had any sleeves on his shirt, and he was missing his left pant leg. Naruto looked down to take in his appearance and sighed, why do I even bother? Higar just stood and watched the boy, his pose rigid and unyielding. However, his mind was racing. The boy should have been on the ground, unconscious from that attack. He had nearly tripled the original power behind it. This kid was serious business. That was a good try, but with people like me, reflecting our own attacks back at us is a waste of time and energy. It just serves to piss us off, Naruto said as his body started to crackle with electricity again. You know, it's said that a dragon's roar can pierce through anything. To have you still standing is a testament to your power. However, now I'm pulling out all the stops. With a war cry, the lightning crackling around Naruto's body shot up straight into the air, at the direction of his arms. About 3 seconds later, a rumble from the sky was heard, as a large, dark cloud formed above the area, the electricity around his body having jumped into the clouds. Lightning Dragon's secret technique, Lightning Storm. As he completed his call, his hands fled down from above his head and ended with his elbows pulled in tight to his sides. With a beckoning flare of energy, the accumulated lightning in the sky raced out of the clouds and blasted on top of Higar's position. His face was contorted in panic as he looked up at his shielding. It seemed to be holding, and for a brief moment, he had thought he won, until a crack appeared in the magic shell around him. After that, it was all it took for the lightning strike to break through and begin to electrocute Higar. His screams were drowned out by the crash of thunder that accompanied the strike. When the technique ended, Higar was a crumpled, smoking, vaguely human-shaped figure lying on the ground. The grass around him was burned to a crisp, and his body was covered in burns that looked like electricity. Every now and then, his body would twitch, the residual charge causing his nervous system to spasm and short-circuit. Naruto dropped to one knee, breathing heavily. That attack had drained more than he had thought it would. He gasped and held out his hand, recalling some of his energy with his electric drain technique. It only served to relieve him a little bit. Man, I should probably start carrying around electrically charged lacrima. Maybe I can get that jerk Laxus to do it, have him charge him but not tell him what they're for. He, that'll surprise him for sure the next time we fight. Standing back up, Naruto looked to all the members that were lying unconscious. Higar looked bad, and if he didn't get medical attention soon, he would probably die from bleeding out. At this thought, Naruto started to sway as images of him doing things played in his mind. In one, he stood over a man who was hurt, before clapping his hands together and charging his hands with electricity before placing them on the man who went rigid, before standing up just fine. Pulse heal. In the next, it showed him standing over a man who was definitely his foe, before he charged one fist and placed his foot on their stomach before tagging them with his hand, and blue arcs appeared at his wrists and ankles, holding him in place. Arc restraint. The final scene showed him hunched over an opponent before bringing his hand towards his opponent's face, having to fight the man to make contact, but when he did, electricity seeped out of his opponent and into his arm. His opponent dropped to the ground, not moving, and detachedly, he knew the man was dead. Bio Leech. Naruto shook his head, regaining his senses. He looked back down to Higar, before moving over and clapping his hands together. He placed them on his opponent's chest, causing his body to jerk violently, but his wounds were less severe for it. He then stood back up, before placing his foot on the man's body before slamming his charged hand on his chest. He was now no danger as the arcing, blue restraints held him in place. He repeated this move to the other two men before turning to the cave and running inside. Urza and Levi rode up on the scene of an old, forgotten church. Outside, there was a group of people tied up, forced to sit as several men in armor walked around the clearing, analyzing the area for clues. Both young women were forced to stop in their advance when two soldiers drew their weapons and pointed them at the pair. Halt! State your names and business for being here, one of the armored men commanded. We are Urza Scarlet and Levi Magarden of Fairy Tale. We're on the tail of a man from our guild, the red-haired woman responded. The two looked between themselves, noticing the guild crest on Urza's armor, before motioning them to follow. The captain would like a word with you. They were led to a tent, emblazoned with the Rune Knight's symbol on either side of the entryway. As they stepped in, they were greeted by a man with a serious look on his face, as he spoke to a lacrima. We need another contingent as soon as possible. We have a large number of dark mages that need to be picked up. Captain Rex requested, informed the person on the other side. Just bring them in yourself. We can't send a detachment to your position, you're too far out, the other person said, noticeable boredom in his voice. Lieutenant Colonel, sir, with all due respect, we have members of the guild missing. All we have are the grunts. None of the heavy hitters are here. There is also the matter of the young man from Fairy Tale who is in pursuit. He needs backup, Rex said, his face stern. Oh, Fairy Tale is involved, he asked in surprise. That is none of my concern. You've been given your orders, bring back your prisoners and then you can return to pursue the remainder. Rex's eyes widened in surprise, but sir, that'll take 4 days round trip. We'll lose them, the situation is dire. There is probably a... Captain, the lieutenant colonel cut him off, his voice stern, I gave you orders and I expect you to follow them. Any more arguing will be considered insubordination. Now bring back the prisoners, that is an order. Rex's face was stony and his eyes murderous. Yes, sir. But know that I am filing a complaint with the higher-ups when I get back. Do that, see how far it will get you, and then the lacrima went dark. Rex's hands dented the table in frustration as he slammed them. Damn him, it was then that he noticed his audience. I remember you, he remarked to Levy, so this must be your backup. He asked, turning to the knight. Urza Scarlet, S-class mage of Fairy Tale, she said as she held out her hand to the man. I've heard of you, he said, grasping the offered appendage in a firm shake. I didn't expect you to be quite so young. Urza just offered an assured smile. It is impressive that your soldiers were able to take so many prisoners. I've seen dark guilds fight until the bitter end. The captain just glanced out the tent to the rounded-up mages. We didn't. They were all unconscious when we arrived. We just tied them up. Urza looked astounded. Could it have been a dissension? Or a house cleaning? I heard you say that their heavy hitters weren't here. Rex just shook his head as he went back to his desk, looking for something. No, usually that ends in the wholesale slaughter of the entire guild. No, we believe that this was done by your friend, that Naruto fellow, he said as he continued to search before finding what he was looking for. Ah, here it is. There were some burnt spots in the wood, radiating from the door inward. Upon analysis, they seemed to be burns caused by lightning magic. He was a lightning mage, right? Levy nodded. Yes, he's a type of lightning mage, she said, feeling it wasn't her right to tell them he was a dragon slayer. Then we can attribute the takedown of those outside to him. It also corroborates the story of those that had remained conscious, saying things about blue lightning. Rex ended, putting his report back down. Urza's respect for this man had gone up a few notches. Their brief pause was interrupted when another soldier appeared in the entryway of the tent. Sir, we believe we have found the path that the remaining members took out of here. Without words, the captain and the Fairy Tale mages followed the recruit. They were led to the other side of the church where the lean-to was. They stopped and the recruit pointed out across the short plain to some other soldiers out by the forest's edge. There are wheel ruts from a carriage leading into the woods there. They seem to be fresher than the rest. We've found something. A call from the tree line caught their attention, causing everyone gathered to hurry on their way down to them. A few feet in the trees, the soldier who found the marking showed his finding. It was a lightning bolt pointing in towards the woods. Urza's eyes scanned the trees, before seeing another a number of yards ahead of their position. It seems that Naruto has left us a trail to follow, Urza responded, pointing out the next marker. Seeing what she was pointing out, Rex turned to the one who alerted their attention. I need you to tell First Sergeant Marcus that he is going to be taking the bulk of the unit and heading back to Era for processing. I need 4 volunteers to stay, preferably people who aren't afraid they might not make it back. There's no way that we can know what we'll find up ahead, Rex commanded. Double time. With a quick salute, the soldier ran off. Rex then motioned to Urza and Levy to follow him back to the church. What are you planning, Captain? Urza asked as she fell into step with him. I don't like my orders, so I'm choosing to ignore them. I hope that it isn't much an imposition, but, could I trouble you to give me and my 4 a lift with your carriage? We'll be coming with you, he asked, turning his face to her, so she could see the seriousness in his face. It would be an honor, Urza replied with a smile. Suddenly, all 3 of them came to a sudden halt. the hairs on their arms rising for no reason. It even caused the odd hair on Urza's head to stray from the curtain that cascaded down her back. "Look!" Levi yelled, pointing behind them. There, in the distance was a massively forming dark thunder cloud. With no warning, a huge bolt of lightning crashed from the sky to the ground. However, this one lasted for a number of seconds that was inordinate to natural lightning, making the three automatically know that it was magical in origin. The crash of thunder that followed was nearly deafening, causing everyone to cover their ears, and sending thrums of sound passing through their bodies. "What was that?" Rex asked, louder than intended. "Naruto," Levi whispered out, in awe of the power that was produced. She knew he had been powerful, yet his nature was gentle. It just showed how much an inspiration one person could be. "Captain, I think we had better hurry," Urza said, her voice more serious than it had been before. With a nod from the captain, they all ran back to the church, Rex barking out orders as they made preparations to leave. Naruto was breathing a little heavier from running through the cavern. The lighting was dim, but his enhanced eyesight allowed him to easily use the near non-existent ambient light to see his way. He rushed ahead, yet his mind couldn't brush off that this felt weird, like he knew where he was. The tunnel was relatively small, only 2 men could walk a sensord, but it would be tight, and it was just high enough for him to not scrape his head on as he ran. He came to a sudden stop as a faint blue light came from around the next bend, lighting up the tunnel somewhat. It then hit him like a ton of bricks. This was an aeration tunnel that refreshed the air in his cave. With fury boiling at the intrusion of his cave, he rushed forward at an even greater speed. A few seconds later, he could hear voices, and all they did was serve to piss him off more. He came to the exit, and his blood boiled. There were 5 men in his cavern. 3 of them were stuffing their packs full of the gold that was in the hoard of the dragon that raised him. The other 2 were in the small antechamber where the library was, throwing books around with complete disregard of their importance. He roared, letting his power flare, and drew all of their attention to him. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" His eyes turning blue and sparking in fury. With insane speed, he launched himself at the nearest member, and before he could react, Naruto had covered the 100 or so feet between them, and nailed him straight in the face with his gigawatt blade-encased fist, sending him careening into a stalactite. Upon seeing their member get hit like that, the other 4 reacted. One of the 2 left at the pile charged, drawing a weird-looking weapon. It was a pole, or pipe that came to a T, then split with 2 other pipes running parallel to each other, their ends ringed in metal discs. The most impressive part, however, was the golden-yellow electricity that arced from the top of the T to the ends of the 2 parallel arms. His opponent swung the weapon, causing Naruto to dodge out of the way, watching as the weapon impacted the ground, causing it to break off a couple chunks of rock, showing its sturdiness. He was forced to further dodge as a hail of needles rained down on his position. Instead of the needles embedding themselves in the ground, the lightning mage raised his weapon, causing them to redirect towards Naruto. He was forced to dodge, right into the path of a fireball. It exploded on him in a storm of fire. "It was foolish of you to attack us so openly," the one who unleashed the hail of needles spoke. "How you got past Higar and the others remains a mystery. I suppose you killed them." From inside the inferno, Naruto stood up, calmly walking out. The front of his shirt was completely burned off, leaving it to hang like a vest, showing angry, red skin. Completely ignoring his opponent's question, he drew back his hand and with a grunt, he threw a line of electricity at the mage with the weird weapon. His opponent raised it to block, only to gaze in shock as the end wrapped around one of the parallel bars. With a forceful yank, the weapon was released from his hands, and flew into the awaiting hands of Naruto. The blonde gripped the weapon in his hands, mildly surprised at its weight. The whole thing was solid. "Bastard! Give me back my amp!" The mage yelled at him. Naruto just gazed at the weapon in his hands and smirked. "Amp, huh? I like it." With that declaration, he pumped his electricity through it, making it spark between the 2 parallels. Grabbing it in one hand, he disappeared in a flash only to reappear below the fire mage, kicking the man's feet from under his body, before standing back up in a split second and raising the amp up and bringing it down on the mage's face. The resounding sound of electricity surging through his opponent's body as well as the breaking of cartilage and possibly bone made the fire mage cringe in horror. There was no time to dwell on the thought as Naruto was forced to dodge yet another hail of needles that came at him from behind. He was lucky to be extremely fast since the needles rained intensely, blanketing a large area. "How dare you interfere with our work, you pest?" The needle mage spoke. He looked down upon Naruto in disdain. "Then you go and attack our men, what audacity!" He punctuated his statement with a punch that threw a line of needles at Naruto. He rolled out of the way, only to have to dodge as they were once again redirected by the lightning mage, even though Naruto still had his amp. Thinking quickly, Naruto channeled electricity through his new weapon, watching as he caught the incoming needles, before pivoting and sending them straight back at the one who cast them with a swing of the amp. The mage did nothing to dodge, just raised his arm and absorbed the needles back into his body. He then dusted off his suit before signaling the other two mages to get down, which they did, before his body seemed to explode like a bomb, throwing needles in a sphere around him. Naruto reacted as fast as he could, bringing his right hand to bear and raising a polarity shield between him and the oncoming attack. His only problem was that wasn't fully standing behind the shield, and as a consequence, his left arm received some modifications. Dropping the shield, he looked down at his arm in pain, seeing more than a dozen needles stuck in the appendage. It hung loosely with the amp clattering at his feet. "Oh, you're still standing. No matter," the needle mage scoffed, his suit looking like Swiss cheese. He called to the lightning mage, since he was closest to the blonde, "Finish him." The other mage stood up before charging up an attack. He brought his hands above his head, before bringing them down in arcs, then bringing them back together around waist height, his left hand resting on the bottom with his right hand on top. He then pulled them apart and an orb of electricity formed in between his hands. The needle mage turned and watched as the final guild mate rose from the ground, dusting himself off. So far he had been the only one to not fight. The two made eye contact, an unspoken conversation being sent through their eyes. They paid no heed when the lightning mage's power spiked, signifying his about to launch the attack, but their attention was drawn when after he cried of the attack's name, there was no explosion. The only sound was a startled gasp. The two whirled around, seeing Naruto gripping the attack in his right hand. It was a sobering event. He was holding a ball of pure, magical electricity in his hand and was not feeling any ill effects of it. Deliberately, he raised the attack to his mouth before taking a bite of the orb. The three mages watched in morbid fascination as he ate the attack. Then, he flexed his left arm, forcing all of the needles from the appendage, the holes healing over, just leaving small trails of blood down his limb. What are you?" the needle mage managed to ask. His only reply was a dramatic increase of power output from the blonde. "Lightning Dragon's Roar," he shouted, releasing a very powerful, wide stream of blue electricity from his mouth at the mages. When the light died down, it showed the lightning mage, and needle mage knocked out, and the last member standing with a giant axe between him and Naruto. The axe easily eclipsed the man in size, the hilt was longer than him by double his height. "Let's dance, kid," the man said as he suddenly grew to 3 times his height, and the axe was now better suited for his use. Naruto just smirked before kicking off at the man. Urza was sitting in the driver's seat of the carriage, her eyes following the markers left by the blonde as he had run through the undergrowth. In the passenger compartment, Levi was sandwiched between two knights in full plate armor, and across from her was 2 more and Captain Rex. She felt smaller than usual, surrounded by men in bulky suits of armor that were also very tall. She shyly looked around the compartment, fighting to keep a blush off her face. "Levi-san," Rex called to gain her attention, "you seem to know the most of Naruto-san, do you think we have any chance of catching up to him? He couldn't have much more than 10 minutes on us." Levi shook her head in apology, "I'm really not sure. He's a really new member. He's only been with the guild for a week. I only know his speed from when we rushed to check out the fire. But I'm certain that even with 10 minutes, he'll have covered at least double the ground that we will." Rex frowned at this development. Their thoughts were disrupted as the carriage came to a shuddering, skidding halt. Those nearest the windows looked out before Rex gave the order to disembark. When they exited the vehicle, they were showed the scene that was the cause of their stop. Outside, there was what looked like the exploded remains of a magical carriage. There were also 4 bodies lying in the vicinity of an entrance to a cave. Urza had already disembarked and made her way over to the biggest of the group, and she was kneeling beside the man with a searching expression. "What do you make of this?" came her voice to the group. They moved over and saw what she was looking at. The man was unconscious, yet it seemed like his limbs were shackled to the ground by blue rings of electricity. Naruto's electricity is blue. Levi's happy cry told the story. So it had seemed that Naruto had been here and arrested the offending members of the guild. Rex just looked on with a stoic face. How do we break them so we can arrest them? Urza reached out a hand to the ring binding the big man's arm, and without any prompting, it disappeared. Urza looked surprised as all rings disappeared at once. Signaling 2 of his men, Rex ordered them to tie up the other 2 and the last 2 of his men to tie up the big guy. Well, looks like he went in there. I wonder where it leads. The 2 ladies and the captain turned to the entrance and were about to enter when what sounded like footsteps echoed through the entrance. The steps were followed by what sounded like something dragging across the ground. The 3 prepared for battle. The captain and Urza drew swords while the little bookworm prepared to throw a spell. The steps grew louder and the scraping drew nearer, and soon, into the light emerged a rather tall blonde dragging a large man, who was tied up with smaller men tied to him, all being dragged by a rope over Naruto's left shoulder. Over his right was the very large axe that the large man used against him, and across his back, glowing with blue electricity, was the amp. Naruto gazed at the impressed expressions of Urza and Rex, who still had their weapons drawn, and then at the rapidly approaching Levi, who jumped up and wrapped her arms around his neck with happy laughter. "I'm so glad you're okay." He let go of the rope and wrapped his left arm around her, giving her a firm hug. "Told you I'd be fine." Letting her go, she dropped back to the ground and gave him a beautiful smile. He then turned to the 2 people in armor and gave a left-handed 2-fingered salute. "Yo." Urza and Rex both resheathed their weapons. Rex was the first to talk. "Geez, kid, you really are a machine. Nice work at the church, by the way. And here for that matter," he said, gesturing around to the surroundings. "Any chance that I could get you to come work for the Rune Knights?" Naruto laughed and shook his head. "Sorry, but my heart is that of a fairy tale mage. I like being able to make my own decisions," he finished with a wink. Rex just chuckled and walked up to the rope that Naruto had been using to pull the tied-up mages, grabbed it, and with very little strain, started dragging them as well. Naruto then turned to the redhead who was walking over, calmly. He nodded his greeting to the woman. "Hi, Naruto Namikaze, at your service." "Didn't catch your name there," he smiled, while extending his left hand, his right still being occupied with the giant axe. "Urza Scarlet, S-class mage of fairy tale," she replied, taking his hand and giving it a firm handshake. "I'm impressed. Not many new members could boast of being able to take down so many mages single-handedly. I'm sure Master Makarov will have high praise to sing for you." Naruto smiled sheepishly and set the axe down into the ground, the blade easily sinking in under its weight. "Nah, I only did what was right. I couldn't let Tartarus get their hands on the book that they wanted. Who knows what they could do with it." Urza nodded in understanding before turning her gaze to the weapon that Naruto had been carrying. "Impressive. I have heard of this axe before," she said, letting her gaze drift over it. "It's one of a pair of axes, both brothers, known as the Giant's Execution. Only those with immense strength and size could ever hope to wield it properly." She then walked to the handle, before turning to Naruto. "May I?" And with a nod from Naruto, she picked it up out of the ground like it was nothing. She faced away from the other 2 mages and gave it a couple of swings. "Why don't you keep it?" Naruto suggested. This in turn caused Urza to look at him with wide eyes. "You can't be serious. This weapon would cost a fortune at any vendor. You just want to give it to me." The expression on her face was priceless. Naruto just nodded, a smile splitting his face. "Yeah, I don't really use weapons, and I recently got something that I find suits me better anyway," he said, pulling the amp off his back. Urza nodded in understanding before concentrating and making the axe disappear into her equip space. With a stretch, Naruto gave a loud sigh of pleasure. "Why don't we head home so I can get a change of clothes and a nice warm shower to get this grime off me?" Urza nodded in affirmation, while Levi blushed thinking of Naruto's frame, water cascading down it. She really should stop reading those types of books. Before they could go to the captain and his men who were also getting their prisoners ready for transport by tying them to the top of the carriage, a voice caused them all to freeze in place. Well, I was wondering what was taking that useless guild so long to get to the meeting site. Seems they ran into a little interference, came a silky smooth woman's voice. All three mages turned to see a petite woman, with long brown blonde hair that came to her ankles. She was dressed in leather pants and a corset, though neither did anything to accentuate curves that were not there. Her feet were adorned by stiletto heels, making the woman who would normally be Levi's height be taller. "Who are you, and what do you want?" Urza commanded as she unsheathed her sword and adopted a fighting stance, while Naruto was in a ready stance. With a bow and giggle, the woman introduced herself. "My name is Cynthia, also known as the Reflection of Tartarus." Urza's and Naruto's eyes widened at the name of the guild, while Levi started to quake in fear. Writing herself, the newly dubbed Cynthia smiled. "Now, if you'd be so kind as to hand over that book, I can be on my way." "We don't have the book you're looking for," Naruto growled out, his arms crackling blue. With a giggle, Cynthia shook her head. "You can't lie to me, I can sense it. It's over there." She then pointed to the magical carriage, confusing the three mages. "Now if you could be a doll and fetch it for me, this won't have to get ugly." Naruto's face only reflected confusion but soon changed to dread upon hearing Levi's gasp. He turned his head to look at the small woman, whose eyes held a fear so potent, she was almost crying. Turning his gaze back to the leather-clad woman, he whispered out to her, "Get to the carriage and destroy that book." Levi hesitantly nodded, before turning and running to the carriage. As soon as she ran, Naruto shot forward like a bolt of lightning, intending on taking this girl down. A look of mild surprise crossed her features before Naruto's leg impacted her face, causing an explosion of light to erupt as well as Naruto's scream of agony to pierce the air. When the light died down, they could only see Naruto kneeled down, holding onto his right leg that looked to be broken. Urza reacted as well, launching herself across the field, her sword held in a high, overhead strike. The woman casually lifted her arm to block as Urza's sword came down. The sound of screaming metal before a loud crack echoed across the field. Urza's sword had shattered, 3/4 of the blade were now just shards of shrapnel that pierced her arms where her armor did not cover, as well as giving a few scratches to her face and neck. The force had reverberated down the blade, causing the handle and remaining quarter of the blade to fly out of her hands and into the small hand of the blonde woman. Levi stared in horror as a solid script, fire spell rested a few feet away from the backpack of books. "I wouldn't do that," the woman's voice called to her as she held the blade at Urza's neck. "Now, bring me the book," her voice no longer having a playful lilt to it. Levi looked down at the pack, before opening it and starting to pull out different tomes. I don't. Leather-bound, vellum pages, gold leaf trimming," the woman's voice called across the field. Levi started searching, tears of fright in her eyes. Her hands shook uncontrollably as she searched for the book. She hoped with all of her might that nothing bad would happen. After tossing about 10 books out of the way, she found the book that she was looking for. She pulled it out of the bag before she turned to the woman. She shivered a bit and unsteadily got to her feet. Fu found it," her voice trembled. Cynthia just shook her head in exasperation. "Then bring it here, you useless girl." Levi started walking uneasily, her steps mired in fear. After a few paces, she was stopped by the blonde man kneeling on the ground. "Don't give it to her, Levi," Naruto shouted. Cynthia's only response was to press the blade into Urza's neck more. "I'm the one with the bargaining piece, now bring it here." Levi took another step before a bright flash of blue erupted from Naruto's hands onto his leg. With a lunge, he body tackled the dark mage, catching her off guard. Despite her ability to stop Naruto's attack, it didn't seem to apply to being able to grapple her. She was actually physically weak. She struggled as he pinned her arms to the ground with his knees. "Get off of me, you pest," she growled out. Naruto chuckled at her command. "I don't think so. You don't seem so tough now." Suddenly, her eyes glowed purple. "I said, get off." From her body erupted a huge kinetic blast that hit Naruto full force, before pushing past and throwing Urza over 15 feet back, through the air. She hit the ground hard, skidding across the ground. Cynthia's eyes widened in amazement that Naruto was still atop her. How is that possible? That amount of force this close should have liquefied your organs. Naruto just smirked, though it was pain, like he had taken a titanic blow in his solar plexus. We dragon slayers are made out of tougher stuff than your regular mages. That hurt, for sure, and I'll be sore in the morning, but you can't kill me that easily. Cynthia's eyes widened before narrowing. Then I'll have to try harder, she sneered as her eyes erupted in purple again. No you won't, Naruto roared as he threw as many volts of electricity through her as he could. She cried out in pain as her concentration was broken. After 10 seconds, Naruto stopped his assault. He took a deep breath at the draining feeling that came with it. He looked at her. Her clothes were smoking and her breathing was a little labored. Now settle down. The Rune Knights are taking you in. She just breathed as Naruto was approached by Urza, Levi, Rex, and one of Rex's subordinates. Rex whistled in appreciation. Damn glad you're on our side. This remark earned a chuckle all around. Urza tucked an errant strand of hair behind her right ear. Very impressive, Naruto. You took down a criminal that even I couldn't. Naruto chuckled before wincing. Yeah, but don't ask me to do it again. He felt his ribs, wincing at each touch. Yeah, definitely going to feel it in the morning. Their banter was cut short by Cynthia chuckling. This caused Rex to snarl, what's so funny? You haha you really think ha 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 you have me beat. The labor in her breathing was steadily lessening. This caused those opposite her to glance between themselves. Let me educate you on my power. It's called rebound, and it uses your force against you. Naruto narrowed his eyes, raising a hand up. What do you mean? What happens when you charge a lacrima up only to release what's contained inside? She smirked with an unstable glint in her eye. Then I'll just censored what's inside out. Naruto roared as his hand sparked with red, menacing lightning. He swiftly brought it down to Cynthia's face, causing the girl's eyes to widen in horror. The feeling of him literally censoring the life out of her brought unbridled terror to her being. With the fear guiding her, she released all of the pent-up energy that she had absorbed during Naruto's assault. The resulting explosion threw everyone around her off and through the air. As the kicked-up dust started to settle, it showed Rex upside down, leaning against the overturned carriage. Urza had tumbled across the ground, ending up 30 yards away. A noticeable dent marred her censored plate, and looked like it made breathing hard if it wasn't the pain of her impromptu trip that was doing it. Levi, who had been a little further back, still took a big brunt of the force. Her tiny body was slumped against a tree, unconscious with blood dripping down her face from somewhere within her hair. And Naruto landed on the ground with a meaty flop and slight bounce about 3 seconds after the dust had settled. He had taken the biggest amount of the force, causing him to fly high into the sky. It was amazing that he was still conscious after all the torment that his body had taken. With labored breathing, he squinted through the pain only to watch as Cynthia stooped down to pick up the book she had come for. She cast a baleful look at Naruto and raised a hand to unleash another kinetic force at Naruto, only to wince and lower her arm. She then turned and left Naruto's vision. Sounds swam around him as others were recovering. The last thing he remembered was the feeling of hands grabbing him, pulling him, and then nothing. Naruto found himself in darkness. He felt weightless. His attention was drawn to a figure standing in the darkness. It was a small boy, dressed in a baggy t-shirt with a red spiral on the front. His legs were adorned with shorts, and his feet were covered in sandals. The boy's face was buried into his left arm, his right clenched at his side. Naruto could hear the sobs that signified the boy's crying. He walked over to the kid. "What's wrong?" Naruto asked, squatting down to the boy's level. The boy showed no reaction to having heard him. "Are you hurt?" Still no answer. "Can you tell me your name?" Sobs were his only response. He waved his hand in front of the boy's face. "Hello. Suddenly, the boy started running, only he wasn't moving. It was like watching a movie with all of the background cut out. Naruto's eyes widened when he could see his face. The 3 whisker-like marks on either side of his face gave it away as himself. "What the?" Naruto asked, stumbling backward. Suddenly, he was facing himself, older now. Probably not even a teenager. He was wearing a hideous orange jumpsuit, and was wearing a strange metal headband. "I'll get him back," Sakura-chan, Datbeo. His younger self remarked, adopting a censored sure smirk and giving a thumbs up. The scene changed again. This time, he was closer to his current age. He was still wearing orange, only now it was evened out with black. A long red coat with black flames across the bottom and a large scroll across his lower back completed the ensemble. So this is what pain is capable of. His effigy spoke, noticing his eyes looked weird and were surrounded by red pigment. The next transition showed him, a little older, glaring up at something. He wasn't wearing the red coat, but was still wearing the orange jumpsuit. Having my friends with me makes me truly strong. Then, there was a bright flash of yellow, and a glowing figure appeared in the darkness. It had the head of a dragon, and the wings of a dragon, but had a long, snake-like body with no appendages. With a loud roar, Naruto found the world fading. Naruto's eyes opened to a white ceiling and the smell of disinfectants. He sat up with a groan, his ribs still hurt. He took a moment to reflect on the dream he had had. I was standing talking and, no, there was wait, I was there and, someone had, too late, he had forgotten already. Something about endless food or something. At that moment, his stomach released a titanic growl. Where can a guy get a bite to eat around here? He asked the room, his voice was scratchy and dry. He looked around and found a sink. Walking to it, he bent over and took a drink from the spigot and sighed as his throat was rehydrated. With a groan, he stretched out, before tensing up in pain as his action strained very sore places. He gingerly relaxed, before groaning in relief. He looked down, seeing his chest wrapped in bandages, going all the way to his waist. His boxers covered up the bottom of the bandages. His right leg was bandaged below the knee as was his left arm below the elbow. In his distraction at his appearance, he didn't hear the door open. The startled gasp caused his attention to fly to the portal out of the room. Mirajan stood, shocked at seeing Naruto awake and moving around, stopped in her tracks and dropped the bag she had been holding before sprinting across the room and tackling Naruto in a hug of epic proportions. "You're awake. We've all been worried about you," she squealed. She then tightened her hug, which elicited a response she had not been intending on. In what could only be described as the most unmanly sound ever made, Naruto shrieked in pain. A shriek like a little girl makes when playing with her friends. The kind of shriek that makes you think that they're being murdered only to see them running around with a smile. Ah ha 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 a. Not too long after, Naruto was to be found by the hospital staff on the floor with an embarrassed Mirajan standing over him, bowing and saying she's sorry repeatedly. Helping the poor man back onto the bed, and giving him a quick once-over to make sure she hadn't made anything worse with her titanic hug of doom, patent pending, the doctors left to get discharge papers as there was nothing else they could do to help along his healing process. His ribs would just be sore for about a week or two. The two now left alone in the room, were strangely muted and reclusive of each other. Mira was looking a little meek, whereas Naruto was just spacing, waiting for his permission to leave. "Oh," Mira exclaimed, disrupting the quiet. She took a few steps to a chair at the foot of the bed, before pulling up the bag she had carried into the room. "I brought you some new clothes. I figured if you woke up, you'd want to change into something more than a hospital gown," she added with a smile. She gently set it on the bed next to him, and stepped back, clasping her hands in front of her chest with a smile splitting her lips. Naruto just glanced from her, back to the bag, before reaching in, and pulling out the first article of clothing. His eyes widened in surprise, before a vicious smirk made its way to his face. It was 10 minutes later when Naruto and Mirajan exited the hospital. Myra's face was awash with red. She had no idea that her choice in clothing would have made such a difference. But it had certainly turned the heat up in the hospital. That was surely the reason that the nurse had fainted in the room, and a handful more as well as some patients had before they had gotten out of the doors where they were now. Naruto had donned his new outfit, and he had to admit, it was cool. Mira had great taste. His torso was covered with a white tank top, which seemed a bit tight as it clung to his form, defining the hard lines of training that he had earned. Over that was a black leather vest that was trimmed all around the armholes, the collar, and the hem with soft gray-white fur. Below that, his legs were covered in long, blue pants that were darker at the waist and lightened as it got closer to the ankles, going from near navy to a shade or two darker than sky. The pants were lined with pockets that ran along the sides of his legs, and were held up by a thick belt, with a secondary, thinner belt hanging loosely off his left hip. His feet were adorned with boots that ran up to his middle shin, and his pants easily tucked into. They were very comfortable, and seemed almost made to his feet. His new wardrobe didn't end there. His hands also got a pair of fingerless gloves. He was even able to slide the ring he got from his mission over the little bit of finger that was on the gloves. And to finish off the ensemble, Mira had decided to also equip him with a pair of forearm bracers. "How much did this set you back, Mira?" Naruto asked as he gave himself a once-over in the light of the afternoon. "Oh, it didn't set me back at all. I used the money that you and Levi brought back. I may have also picked up a couple of dresses as well." Mira blushed as she thought about just how many she actually bought. Naruto nodded his approval. "You have very nice taste," he complimented with a smile. Mira giggled and blushed at the compliment before they both set off for the guild hall. The walk was companionable and quiet, until Naruto had to break it again. "Say, Mira," he said, getting her attention, "I didn't ask you in the hospital, but how many days was I out?" 2.5, Mira replied. "It took Urza about half a day to get you and Levi back here. You were in a far worse condition, that's why you were still at the hospital. Levi just got bandaged up and some painkillers for her headache. She's really beating herself up about what happened." Naruto looked sad at that revelation. "No, it's my fault that we lost to that Cynthia person. I was the one who attacked her without knowing the extent of her powers." He then punched his left fist into his right palm with a grim look on his face. "Next time I'll be ready, though. She won't stand a chance." Mira just looked with a slightly open mouth before she closed it into a smile. She then moved closer to him and wrapped her arms around his right arm and leaned her head on his shoulder. "So, if those bad people ever come back, you'll protect me, right, Naruto?" Naruto's face lit up a bright crimson as he glanced down at her. Well, of course, Mira-chan. I'll protect you, I'll protect Levi-chan, I'll protect your stupid brother, and I'll protect everyone in Fairy Tail. Because you're all my precious people, and I always protect my precious people." Mira's eyes softened as she looked up at him. She then lowered her head back to his shoulder and sighed wistfully. They continued on as such until they reached the door of Fairy Tail, where the sounds of a rowdy party could be heard. Naruto turned to Mira with a smile on his face. "Sounds like one hell of a party in there. Is there any reason not to have one?" he asked the beauty by his side. With a giggle, his only reply was a shake of the head before he pushed the door open. He noticed that everyone in the hall was now looking at who was coming through the doors. Upon seeing Naruto, a huge, explosive round of cheers resounded throughout the hall. It was nearly deafening. The clear surprise on Naruto's face was evident. He was broken from his stunned silence as Mira stepped through the door around him. He just followed her and let the door swing closed behind him. The cheering didn't stop, however, and a few cat calls and shouted greetings floated to him through the air. "Yeah, Naruto, good job, kid, have a drink on me. Come sit with us." Naruto just raised his hand, confusion still permeating his being. He waved to everyone, which only seemed to make them cheer harder. He made his way up to the bar, where Mira had taken her place behind and Makarov had taken his spot on the bar. The old man was clearly 3 sheets to the wind, and his face reflected that. The usual light dusting of red had instead encompassed his entire face. A bit of the head of the beer clung to his mustache, yet his eyes were lidded heavily and a slight sway was in his posture. "Aha!" Makarov called as he spied Naruto. He pointed at the young man unabashedly. "There he is. Our newish class mage." He then cackled manically before passing out on the bar top. Naruto stared at him wide-eyed, and responded astutely, "What? Thanks."